Okay, I think I finally got this ready to go. So, I just got home from fishing, and looks like just about 15 minutes ago, the patch notes dropped. I'm sure there are plenty of people doing this exact same thing, but I'm going to do it and give you my thoughts. So, this looks like a lot right off the bat. Some of these I know will be short. But we'll read through all of it. So this is definitely going to be a long video, but totally worth it. So, Harvest Challenge League. Challenge Leagues are a great opportunity for a fresh start in a new economy. Let me, should I put on some music? I can put on some music. Let me do this. And let's get some music in the background just to spice things up a little bit. How do we feel about some soundtrack? Maybe, sure. All right. The Final Fantasy Tactics soundtrack. I don't even know if that comes through at all, but there we go. It definitely comes through on my mic. So maybe we'll have the desktop audio off. So, Challenge Leagues are a great opportunity for a fresh start in a new economy. All of your old characters and items are still present in the Standard and Hardcore Leagues, but you're encouraged to join the new leagues, complete challenges, and demonstrate your mastery path by exile. Yeah, we know. Harvest Challenge League, you'll meet Oshabi, an Asmeri mystic who has enlisted your help in exploring the mysterious powers of the Sacred Grove. In each area of Ray class, you'll discover seed cache, or as Chris Wilson says, cache. That actually kind of triggered me in the reveal. And we'll be able to travel through Oshabi's portal to the Sacred Grove to plant those seeds. Fully grown seed crops unearth dangerous monsters when harvested. Slaying these harvested monsters yields their life force, a powerful resource which can be used for crafting and growing more exotic crops. The crafting potential from harvest monsters is immense, unlocking new power for both leveling and endgame players alike. Some harvested monsters may yield higher tier seeds that require more elaborate garden setups but grant even more powerful crafting options. Climbing the tiers of seeds will eventually pit you against some powerful new bosses who can draw new unique items exclusively available from them. With 3.11.0, there are standard, hardcore, and solo self-found variations of the Harvest Challenge League available. They have the same core mechanics and items. You can create private league versions of these leagues with mods that make the game harder. I'm actually going to turn this music down a little tiny bit because some of them will be quite loud. Okay, new challenges. We already saw this, but for the sake of completeness, new challenge leagues include a set of 40 new challenges. When you complete 12, you'll receive the Harvest Footprints. 24, you receive the Harvest Cloak. At 36, you will receive the Harvest Portal. These microtransactions are only available in this league. From the 19th challenge onward, and for every third challenge after that, you'll receive pieces of the Harvest Totem Pole decoration to display in your hideout. The Totem Pole permanently showcases how many of the Harvest challenges you completed during the league. Major new content. Added a new strength skill gem, General's Cry. Performs a war cry taunting nearby enemies to attack the user, and summoning Mirage. You can't see this at all. I'm not very smart. Added a new strength skill gem, General's Cry. Performs a war cry taunting nearby enemies to attack the user, and summoning Mirage Warriors from nearby corpses. The Mirage Warriors each use a linked attack skill once before dissipating. Yeah, that's fine, whatever. New strength skill gen, Intimidating Cry. Performs a war cry intimidating nearby enemies and taunting them to attack the user, as well as exerting the user's next 2 attacks. Grants a buff which reduces the effect of enemy armor against your hits. As a new strength skill gem, Seismic Cry. Performs a war cry taunting nearby enemies to attack the user and exerting the user's next 4 slam attacks. Grants a buff which makes it easier for you to stun enemies. Adds a new strength skill gem, Ancestral Cry. Performs a war cry, taunting all nearby enemies to attack the user, and exerting the user's next 8 strike attacks. Grants a buff which gives you bonus armor and melee range. So 8 and 4 and 2. Those are very different. Added a new intelligence strength skill gem, Penance Brand. Creates a magical brand which can attach to a nearby enemy. It periodically activates while attached, adding energy to the branded enemy. Each activation, energy spreads from each energized enemy to an enemy in range, which is not energized by the brand. If the branded enemy has 20 energy, each activation will instead deal a pulse of area damage. Energy explodes when the energized enemy dies or the brand is removed, dealing damage in an area. It's so awkward, I think. It might be really good if the activation frequency is like 0.1 seconds, because then that means in 2 full seconds it starts pulsing damage. Maybe it'd be 0.2 seconds. Okay, Wintertide Brand. Creates a magical brand which can attach to a nearby enemy, dealing cold damage over time and chilling them. It periodically activates while attached, gaining stages that raise the damage. When removed, a short duration debuff dealing the same damage over time and chill is applied to each nearby enemy. Added a new intelligence skill gem, Arcanist Brand. Creates a magical brand which can attach to a nearby enemy. It periodically activates while attached, triggering linked spells. The brand will detach if the enemy dies. Added a new intelligence support gem, Swift Brand Support. Supports brand skills, causing them to activate more frequently but reducing their duration. Added a new strength skill gem, Earth Shatter. Slam the ground, sending out shockwaves that damage enemies and end in spikes. These spikes can be detonated by any slam attack or war cry. Works with maces, scepters, axes, staves, and unarmed. Added a new strength support gem, Fist of War. Supports slam attacks, ancestrally empowering the supported attack with improved damage and area of effect. Added 3 War Cry skill gems, Enduring Cry, Abyssal Cry, reworked 3. Enduring Cry, Abyssal Cry, which is now called Infernal Cry, and Rallying Cry. Added 14 new uniques, one of which was designed by a supporter. Rebalanced more than 50 unique items, not including accommodations made for base type changes. Added 12 new div cards designed by our supporters. Minor new content and features. Alongside improvements made to Path of Exile's engine, we have changed the post-processing settings so that 2 specific ones are separately exposed, reducing the intensity of the new bloom effect and disabling blur effects, such as those played when transitioning into or out of an incursion. We've also improved how screen shake effects, such as those played on a critical hit, are handled, toning down the wild variants and ensuring you can always still see the action. This new screen shake can be disabled in options if desired. Added 2 new Rogue Exiles, designed with the help of our talent competition winners. Added new Labyrinth enchantments for both new and reworked skills. Improved the visual effects of a number of player and monster skills, including Earthquake, Firestorm, Ground Slam, Ice Crash, Creeping Frost. Okay, so they renamed Arctic Breath. Perforate all Warcry skills, Sunder, Molten Strike, Tectonic Slam, Incinerate Arc, Herald of Ash, Arcane Cloak, Armageddon Brand, Orb of Storms, and Lightning Warp. I'll be interested to see what these look like now. Updated the frames on passive skill hovers to the ones created for Path of Exile 2. Okay, that's cool. Taunted enemies now have a more visible effect played on them. Improved the behavior of pets playing their animations while deployed as a hideout decoration. Okay, so hideout pets look better, I guess. Updated the visual surge effect played when casting an elemental spell. Spells with a Stygian effect now produce a Stygian surge around the player character when cast. Weapon skins from supporter packs can now be applied to both weapons when dual wielding. Added more music to the list of hideout music options. The default music for any particular hideout is now indicated. Added some missing dialogue for Xana's missions. Improved the Dragon Fireball visuals and reduced the flashing when they explode to make them easier on the eyes. That's a good change. Added an option to prevent other players from using your map device portals in your hideout. That's convenient. Carpets in Solaris temple tile sets now align with the doors. Yay. Improved how audio is handled for performance, and continued to incrementally improve the sound, artifacts, and environments. Thank God. I was really worried they weren't going to do that this patch. Delirium mechanics added to core. Delirium has been added to the core game. From the Torch Courts onward, you'll have approximately a 5% chance to encounter a mirror of Delirium in each area. So, okay. So the end of Act 5, essentially. I think that's fine. I think that's good. Once you reach the Atlas, that chance will increase by a small amount for each other League, Atlas, or Master mechanic that appears in that area. In other words, if your goal is to encounter Mirrors of Delirium, then you are encouraged to use your Zana modifiers, Master Missions, Sextants, and whatever else you have available to you. Okay. So if I had to guess, it will go up by maybe like 2.5% per additional effect, which is about what I would expect. I wouldn't want it to be too much. You'll now have a greater chance of finding cluster jewels through delirium encounters, proportional to the number of rewards you earn during that encounter. Character balance. The Shikari God power no longer makes you immune to poison. Yeah, I think they teased that last night. It now causes poisons on you to have 50% less duration and prevents you from being poisoned while there are at least 5 poisons on you. I still think this is very strong. It just doesn't completely destroy Hunter and Constrictor. Hexproof now acts like an immunity effect when gained, such as via Headhunter, and will remove any curses already present on you when gained. Yeah, when they said this yesterday in the Balance Manifesto, my very first thought was Headhunter. And I think that that's a really good change. That's a really good way to nerf Temp Chain's Headhunter. I think that that is very good. And they basically were just like, oh, this was unintended the whole time. Sure. Dual wielding no longer grants 20% more physical attack damage. It still grants 10% more attack speed and 50% chance to block attack hits. Skill rework, Warcries. Greater support for Warcries has been added to the passive skill tree in the form of new and changed clusters and even a new keystone. Warcries no longer share a cooldown by default. All Warcries now have a base time of 0.8 seconds, and their effects tend to linger for a greater duration. Their base cooldowns are now also longer. Each Warcry is enhanced by the proximity of enemies, and for some Warcries, allies or corpses too. This is measured as power, with normal enemies providing 1 power, magic enemies providing 2, rare enemies providing 10, unique enemies providing 20, and players providing 5. All Warcries also taunt enemies in range. Warcries now cause a certain number of attacks to become exerted after the Warcry is used, except Enduring Cry and General's Cry. However, the attacks done by the General's Cry Mirage Warriors are exerted. Oh, that is interesting. Exerted attacks are enhanced in different ways depending on the Warcry. Your exerted attacks can benefit from the effects of multiple Warcries if the type of attack is valid. Abyssal Cry now taunts all nearby enemies to attack the user and exerts the next 4 melee attacks. It also covers enemies in ash, slowing them and making them more vulnerable to fire damage. Causes enemies to explode when they die, dealing fire damage in an area. Exerted attacks trigger Combust. Excuse me. Which converts 60% of physical to fire and deals 100% attack damage in an area at gem level 1 up to 158% at gem level 20. This is really, really interesting. So I think Infernal Cry will also have another skill that it activates called Combust. So I think you'll be able to scale this 2 different ways. And you'll be able to scale Combust with linked support gems, presumably. Now has a base duration of 5 seconds at gem level 1 up to 5.9 at gem level 20. Explosions from slain enemies deal fire damage equal to 8% of the monster's maximum life. Enemies covered in ash take 3% increased fire damage per 5 power up to 20. Now gains 1% increased area of effect for Infernal Cry per 1% gem quality. Now it's a new gem icon. Man, why am I so yawny? Rallying Cry now taunts all nearby enemies to attack the user and exerts the next 5 melee attacks. Give nearby allies a buff based on the damage of the user's weapon. Base duration of 5 seconds up to 5.9, just like Infernal Cry. Buff grants added attack damage equal to 3% of the damage of your main hand weapon per 5 power up to a maximum of 20%. Counts both allies and enemies in range for power. This buff has 100% more effect on your minions. This is nuts. So you can give your minions added attack damage equal to 40% of your main hand damage. I think that's bonkers. I think that is absolutely bonkers. Exerted attacks deal 5% more damage per affected ally up to 25%. Gains 1% increased AoE. Okay, whatever. Enduring Cry now taunts all nearby enemies to attack the user and grants endurance charges. Gives a brief burst of life regen, as well as a buff which grants resists and physical damage reduction based on your endurance charges. Base duration of 2 seconds. Ah, that's so short. Grants 1 endurance charge per 5 power with a minimum of 1 charge. Buff grants 2% all resist and 2% phys reduction per endurance charge. Causes you to regenerate 120 life over 1 second at gem level 1, up to 1,976 at gem level 20. That is good regen. Sunder now slams the ground, creating a slow wave of churning terrain that damages enemies in a sequence of areas in front of you. Enemies hit by the wave will release a damaging shockwave in an area around them. Using the skill again will stop the previous wave. Requires a mace, scepter, axe, staff, or unarmed. The wave creates 5 areas. Ugh. I don't know why I'm so tired. The wave creates 5 areas and cannot stop before creating 2 areas. There is a delay between areas the wave creates. Gem gains reduced delay between areas as it levels, up to 25% reduced delay between areas at gem level 20. The wave can cause a shockwave from up to 5 enemies. The wave gains +2 to the radius of each area in the sequence. Shockwaves now deal 40% less damage from 60. Now gains more area of effect as the gem levels up to 19% at gem level 20. I think overall this is a nerf. It's probably still very strong, but I think that's a nerf overall. Tech Slam no longer has a chance to consume endurance charges per attack to create a charge slam. Now consumes an endurance charge every 3rd time you create a fissure, and gains 5% more area of effect and 5% branching fissure chance per endurance charge. The spread of fissures has been partially normalized, ensuring both sides of the main fissure will get at least 1 branching fissure. Now deals base damage and has an added damage effectiveness of 180% at gem level 1 up to 220% at gem level 20. Okay. So Tech Slam I would say is better. Skill balance, mana costs. Skills whose costs are reduced to 0 are now shown to have a mana cost of 0 to differentiate them from skills which do not have a mana cost. Okay, that's interesting. Brands have had their detached durations reduced, and these durations are no longer refreshed by brand recall. New brand playstyles are now supported through new passive skill tree clusters, keystones, and support gems, as well as a suite of new brand skills. When an enemy dies while a brand is attached, the brand will return to its original position, i.e. wherever it appeared when it was first cast, or recalled position. Slams. A number of existing skills are now tagged as slam skills, which determines whether or not they are affected by supports, passives, and modifiers to slam skills. The existing skills which are now considered slam skills are Ground Slam, Veil Ground Slam, Leap Slam, Ice Crash, Earthquake, Veil Earthquake, Sunder, Ancestral War Chief, Tectonic Slam, Perforate, Toriani's Touch, and Consecrated Path. Interestingly, Veil Ancestral War Chief is not on this list. Okay, totems. Made improvements to totem AI for skills that have some sort of prerequisite for use, such as blades for Blade Blast or corpses for Detonate Dead. Arcane Cloak now has a mana cost of 0 rather than no mana cost. Arctic Breath. There was an error which caused Arctic Breath to not correctly inherit damage penalties from gems like Greater Multiple Projectiles after gem level 1. We have fixed this and have compensated the damage accordingly. So they increased its damage. And wow, okay, they gave it 8 more cold damage per second. Why? I wonder, I don't know. That just feels totally irrelevant to me. I wonder why they even did that. Maybe they normalized it throughout some of the other levels. I have no idea. Okay, Armageddon Brand activates every 0.75 seconds from 0.8. Deals a little bit more fire damage, up to... this is a pretty big buff. That's like 20%. 20% more damage. Now has an added damage effectiveness of 85% from 75. Deals up to 250% more damage with Ignite. Detached duration of 6 seconds and a base AoE of 22 units. Those are good buffs. I mean, I played Armageddon Brand right when it came out, although I think it had gotten nerfed inexplicably at some point. But right when it first came out, I played it, and I thought it was quite strong. Ball Lightning is buffed? What? Ball Lightning is buffed. Almost a 25% more damage at gem level 20. Increased damage effectiveness and reduced mana cost. Wow. So I guess Spellslinger starts are just absolutely nuts. Right? Like Spellslinger Arc, Spellslinger Ball Lightning, and now your Ball Lightning is just way better. Bear Trap. Added damage effectiveness of 260%. Okay. Body Swap. Improved the targeting behavior of triggered Body Swap when nothing was targeted. It now prioritizes corpses if there are any near your targeted position. Brand Recall. No longer refreshes duration of recalled brands. Spends 20% of each recalled brand's mana cost to activate them when they are recalled. Oh, yeah, I suppose you're right. The change to slower proj is functionally a nerf to Ball Lightning. Yeah, okay, I guess that makes sense. Brand Recall no longer refreshes the duration of recalled brands. Spends 20% of each recalled brand's mana cost to activate them when they are recalled. Has a cooldown of 4 seconds from 3. Now gains up to 40% cooldown recovery speed at gem level 6 from 50. So I don't think this is nerfed as much as people think. I think refreshing the duration was a big deal, but I don't know. The only thing this does is, well, I think the refreshing the duration is the biggest thing. I don't think the mana cost really matters, and the cooldown doesn't really matter, because you're still going to be able to cast it often enough, where I think you'll be able to zoom through maps. Cyclone no longer makes you immune to stun while channeling, rather. Dual Strike now deals base damage and has an added damage effectiveness of 125% at gem level 1 up to 190% at gem level 20 from 170, so Dual Strike got buffed. Earthquake. Aftershocks no longer have added physical damage. Aftershocks now deal 150% more damage with hits and ailments, can now be used while unarmed. The base radius of the initial hit is now 14 units from 18. Wow, this feels like a nerf. It's cool that you can use it with unarmed, but the fact that they got rid of the flat fizz, I think really hurts. And they lowered the radius, like, pretty significantly. Fireball has added damage effectiveness of 240%. That is very big. No longer gains additional explosion radius as the gem levels up. That kind of sucks. Now gains additional explosion radius based on the distance it travels. Okay, so that's its threshold jewel built in. Up to +9 at gem level 20. I actually think that that's pretty reasonable. This is big. The 60% additional damage effectiveness, right? That's an extra 33% more damage effectiveness, right? That's not 33% more damage, but 33% more damage effectiveness. And the radius as it travels is actually a really interesting mechanic. Firestorm does a little bit more damage at gem level 1. Oh, and it has more added damage effectiveness. Freezing Pulse has added damage effectiveness. Frostbolt has added damage effectiveness. Wow. This Freeze Pulse and Frostbolt buff, I think, are pretty significant. Even the Firestorm buff, like going from 30 to 45, is quite a lot. It means that like added fire to spells on your wands is really effective with Firestorm now. Because going from 30 to 45 is 50%, right? That's 50% more added damage effectiveness. I think that's big. Ground Slam no longer has added Flat Fizz. Now deals base damage and has an added damage effectiveness of 115% up to 150%. No longer tagged as a physical gem. Really? No longer tagged as physical. Herald of Purity no longer grants added physical damage with spells and attacks. Now grants 9% more physical damage at gem level 1 up to 12% more physical damage at gem level 20. Yeah, I don't like this change. I talked about that last night a little bit. I think Purity is DOA. Herald of Thunder no longer has a 0.4 second cooldown on the storm repeatedly striking the same enemy. Now favors striking enemies that have been struck fewer times. It does a little bit less damage. And an added damage effectiveness of 100%. Wow, Herald of Thunder got nerfed. I am a little bit surprised about that, to be totally honest. Ice Crash no longer has added cold damage, now converts 100% of Fizz to cold. That's a nice change. Glad to see that. Has a base damage effectiveness of 230 from 190 up to 280 from 240. Pretty big buff. Second stage now deals 50% less damage, and third stage now deals 30% less damage. Okay, so they made the second and third stage deal even less damage, but they buffed its damage. Overall, I think this is a buff. Getting rid of the flat, though, I don't understand why they did that. Getting rid of the flat from everything makes me really upset. I think they were just so worried that Facebreaker unarmed builds with all of these slams were going to be ridiculously powerful, but man, you lose out on a lot by not using an actual weapon. Ice Trap now has an added damage effectiveness of 200%. Lol. So, like, they really want you to use Ice Trap. Infernal Blow converts 60% to fire. Lightning Trap has added damage effectiveness of 170. Lightning Spire Trap got nerfed by a little, but it got nerfed. Magma Orb got a big damage effectiveness buff. Now chains +2 times at gem level 1, up to +3 times at gem level 20. Deals 9 to 12, up to 856 to 1284 at gem level 20. That is a pretty big buff. That's like 20% more damage. Now gains base radius as the gem levels up to 4 radius at gem level 20. Wow! This is a big buff to Magma Orb. I mean, Magma Orb was already quite strong. I wonder if they did this because they supposedly are nerfing Gloomfang. We'll see how Gloomfang is nerfed later on, but that's what I heard. But this, man, this just seems very, very good. We know the Molten Strike buff. It got changed a little bit. Its threshold jewel is changed, and it now starts out doing a little bit less damage and does a little bit more damage at gem level 20. Orb of Storms, very slight nerf to damage effectiveness. An error, which caused Orb of Storm's strike frequency to benefit doubly from increased cast speed, was fixed, which has affected the balance of this skill, particularly for high cast speed builds. Interesting. Perforate now deals base damage and has an added damage effectiveness of 125% at gem level 1, up to 170% at gem level 20. So that's actually a damage nerf. But it does get flat fizz. Okay, so this is weird. Perforate is a slam. Perforate can be used, I think it's one of the ones that, maybe it can't be used with unarmed. But it does get flat fizz. Creates an additional spike. 2 additional spikes if you've changed stances recently. 75% less damage in Blood Stance, and more AoE while in Sand Stance, up to 76% more at gem level 20. Purifying Flame now has an added damage effectiveness of 180% from 140%. That's a big buff. Stormbrand got its crit buffed, interestingly. Damage effectiveness nerfed. Activation frequency nerfed, and detach duration nerfed also. Summon Holy Relic now has crit. That is interesting. Static Strike now deals base damage and has an added damage effectiveness of 110%, very slight buff, up to 150% at gem level 20, very slight nerf. Base duration of 2 seconds from 4, that's a big nerf. Converts 50% of Fizz to Lightning. That's a little bit of a nerf, I think. No longer causes beams to deal 60% less damage while stationary and 40% less damage while moving. Beams now deal 40% less damage at all gem levels. No longer creates a stacking buff, and no longer gains 10% increased beam frequency per buff stack. Beams now hit nearby enemies every 0.4 seconds at gem level 1 down to 0.32 seconds at gem level 20. Wow. So they said they were reworking Static Strike. This feels like it's just a nerf. Going down to a base duration of 2 seconds, that is huge. The thing that made Static Strike even remotely playable was that you could hit something and run for 10 seconds, and you would hit things while you were moving. But the skill is garbage otherwise. I think this is stupid. Wave of Conviction got a huge damage effectiveness buff. It did not need it. Wave of Conviction was already very strong. Veil Skill Balance. Base attack speed is now 75% to match Earthquake from 100%. Now has an added damage effectiveness of 60%. Okay, so its attack speed was nerfed, but its damage effectiveness was buffed. Veil Fireball got the similar damage effectiveness buff. No longer gains explosion radius. Gains explosion radius as it levels. Okay, so Veil Fireball just got the same treatment as regular Fireball. I'm assuming Veil Ground Slam got the same. Yep, no longer has added Fizz. Got, wow, 300% damage effectiveness at gem level 20. And base attack speed lowered. Veil Lightning Trap got a pretty hefty increase to damage effectiveness, similar to Lightning Trap. VMS, we know about this nerf. Grants you a lot less armor, but gives you a more armor buff. Causes 30% of damage taken from hits to be taken from the buff before your life or energy shield at gem level 1 up to 35% at gem level 20, which is a nerf from 80% at all levels. So that is rip. Buff can take damage equal to 30% of your armor from 60 up to a maximum of 30,000. Buff reflects 300% of damage taken from the buff as fire damage each second, or when the buff expires, or is depleted at gem level 1. Up to 9. Okay, so the damage it reflects is tripled, but the damage it can absorb and all of the juicy defensive benefits are gutted. Now removes and is removed by any other guard skill. Okay, well that's a shame. Archmage. Supported skills now gain added lightning damage equal to 70% of the mana cost of the gem, up to 108% at gem level 20 from 127. So this is not as significant a nerf as I was expecting. The real nerf is that it does not affect Stormbrand as much, right? I guess not. Unless Archmage is just no longer going to support brands. But I don't think this really changes much. Shockwave now gains additional uses as the gem levels up to 4 at gem level 20. This is huge for Shockwave. It felt really bad, just like you'd hit an enemy and boom, there's your Shockwave. Sorry, wait another couple seconds. Now deals 160% of base damage at gem level 1 up to 260% at gem level 20 from 210. So that's a nice little buff. Slower Proj now have 20% less Proj speed at gem level 1 up to 30% less at gem level 20 from 49. So it no longer slows down by quite as much. I mean, yeah, I guess this is a nerf to like Ball Lightning, but yeah, I guess like a 19% less speed is pretty significant. Taking the opportunity with this patch to review the passive skill tree as a whole with a few specific goals in mind. We wanted to add support for mechanics that have been added in the past few years that as of yet do not have adequate support on the passive tree. Some of these mechanics include Rage, Unleash, Corpse Manipulation, War Cries, Heralds, and Banners. Many passive skill clusters offered the same thing as other clusters, with the only differences being the location on the tree and the number of passive skills in the cluster. In this patch, we have endeavored to give each cluster its own identity and function. This is good. I was saying it yesterday in the Balance Manifesto, I like making clusters unique. I like there being some decision-making in the clusters that you get, and having the clusters that you choose really change the functionality of your build. Timeless Jewel Keystone passives have become a popular feature for many builds, but are prohibitively difficult to acquire, especially without trade. We've moved some of the most build-defining keystones out of the Timeless Jewels and into the tree itself. These keystones have been added to the tree: the Agnostic, Glancing Blows, Supreme Ego, Wind Dancer, and Eternal Youth. We've also added new keystones as a part of our effort to support new mechanics. These keystones are the Impaler, Imbalanced Guard, and Call to Arms. We also wanted to reduce the power of some clusters that were overly efficient and increase the powers of clusters that were inefficient. Ultimately, the passive skill tree should provide more interesting choices regardless of your build. Due to the volume of the changes to the passive skill tree, we won't be listing each change out. Instead, you can check out the new tree for yourself here. Oh, it's a download. Well, maybe we'll look at that later. Ascendancy Balance. Corpse Pact no longer has an upper limit. Now has an upper limit, yeah. I read about this in the Balance Manifesto. It caps at 200%. Supposedly, that's with some new corpse manipulation abilities and clusters. So they capped it. I still think that 200% is perfectly reasonable. Chieftain, Tawoa, Taoa, Forest Strength has moved and is no longer a prerequisite for Valako, Storm's Embrace. It has been redesigned and now grants level 20 Taoa's Chosen, which is triggered when you use a slam skill, creating an image which mirrors your slam attack. This skill has a short cooldown. A new small passive leads to Taoa Forest Strength. It grants 10% increased area of effect and 0.5% life regen per second. Valako Storm's Embrace no longer grants 3% more damage for each endurance charge lost recently up to 15%. Instead, it now grants 15% more damage for 8 seconds when you lose or consume any endurance charges. This is probably a better change. The small passive leading to Valako Storm's Embrace no longer grants 50% increased endurance charge generation. It now grants 5% chance to gain an endurance charge on kill. I like that. I'll always like things that give me a chance to get charges. Berserker. Warbringer has been redesigned. It now causes Warcries to grant 5 rage per 5 power if you have less than 25 rage, and causes them to sacrifice 25 rage if you have at least 25 rage. It also causes exerted attacks to deal 50% more damage if a Warcry sacrificed rage recently. This is a big change. Having your exerted attacks deal 50% more damage is huge. And I think this is really the only redeeming reason to be very Warcry-centric. Like, I think a lot of builds now will use a Warcry, but to have it as really part of your core build, this is about it. Small passive no longer grants 20% increased Warcry duration, now grants 20% increased Warcry speed. Hierophant, Sign of Purpose has been redesigned and now causes brands to have 100% more activation frequency in the final 25% of their attached duration. It now causes Brand Recall. It also causes Brand Recall to have 100% increased cooldown recovery speed. This is really interesting, right? They cast twice as often when they're about to actually expire. Cool. Item balance. Labyrinth Helmet enchantments that granted reduced Earthquake duration can no longer be obtained, though existing versions are affected. Existing versions of this enchantment now grant extra chance for branching fissures. Rallying Cry buff effect now grants... Wow. So from 50 to 75 got nerfed to 10 to 15%, and you can't get it anymore. Same thing with duration. You can no longer get Rallying Cry duration. Increased buff effect now grants increased cooldown reduction instead and can no longer be obtained. Helmet enchantments for increased duration for Abyssal Cry now grant increased cooldown recovery speed for Infernal Cry instead, can no longer be obtained. Abyssal Cry damage now instead grant Infernal Cry damage and can no longer be obtained. Okay, so they're basically saying all of these old Warcry lab enchants got gutted and you can't get them anymore. Essence of Hysteria on boots will now drop burning ground every 10 units from 25. This is a big buff. Added the new oil in the middle of progression. Added 13 ring anointments that utilizes the new indigo oil. Due to the removal of some notable passive skills, some existing anointed amulets may now have new notables on them. Amulets previously anointed with Battle Cry now have Admonisher. Those with Words of Glory now have Natural Authority. Added new Elder Slayer influence modifiers to several slots. I don't really understand what this means. Are they just saying there are some new influence mods that you can get? Hunter Influenced Ring modifier that grants faster start of energy shield recharge is now instead found on Redeemer Influenced Rings. Existing items are unaffected. Okay. Seems like a little bit of an odd change, but whatever. So, two-handed rebalance. We reviewed all two-handed weapon base types and have adjusted their attack damage, speed, and implicits with the goal of giving two-handed weapon builds a different feel to their dual-wield and one-handed counterparts, and to ensure that the damage you gain by using a two-hander made up for the lack of block and slower attack speed. All two-handed weapons have had their base damage increased by at least 15%, with axes in particular gaining even more damage. Azimite Staff, base crit is now 7.3 from 7. Implicit grants 20% block. Maelstrom Staff gets another 0.3% crit and another 5% block. Judgment Staff, another 0.2% crit and 20% spell block. I really like the War Stave changes. I really like having staves give block. That's always been something that I have enjoyed. And spell block is particularly interesting because spell block is typically relatively difficult to get. I could see some good judgment staves being very interesting now. Okay, so Morning Star, 15% AoE from 4, finally. Solar Maul is 15. Yeah, I'm glad that these give a real amount of area now. 4% felt like just nothing. Karui Maul is a little bit slower, and 45% increased stun duration. Colossus Mallet, faster, more crit, grants 30% increased area damage as an implicit. That's cool. Pile Driver, a little bit faster. Implicit is 20% reduced stun threshold. Meat Grinder, implicit now grants 5% chance to deal double damage. That is awesome. This is very, very good. Imperial Maul, implicit grants 10% increased strength. It's also very good. Terror Maul, a little bit slower, a full 1% crit. Implicit now grants 25% chance to double stun duration. That's really cool. That's a really cool implicit. And Coronal Maul, tiny bit slower, gives you 20% AoE up from 6. Very nice. Karui Chopper, a little bit slower. Sundering Axe, a little bit faster. Implicit gives you 20% bleed dot multi. Okay. Azomite Axe, little tiny bit faster, 0.7% base crit. Veil Axe, little tiny bit slower. Implicit now gives attacks with this weapon 25% chance to maim on hit. Adziri's disfavors a Veil Axe, right? So disfavor now has inbuilt maim. Despot Axe, a little bit faster, and Void Axe gets a full percentage crit. Those are honestly some really nice changes overall. And then swords that had 30% accuracy grant 45, 45 grant 60. Reaver sword, a little bit faster, 60% global accuracy. Veil Greatsword, attacks with this weapon, plus 400% accuracy. Lion Sword, 50 strength and dex. That's also a really cool implicit. Infernal Sword, 30% wed. And Exquisite Blade gets, lower crit and lower crit multi. Well, that's stupid. I really like these two. Lion Sword and Infernal Sword. And I said it last night, Oros is an Infernal Sword, right? So Oros now has inbuilt 30% wed, which is great. Cluster Jewel Balance. Many balance changes have been made to passive skills granted by Cluster Jewels. This affects all existing Cluster Jewels with the passives automatically. Following notables have been affected: Hexbreaker, Evil Eye, Forbidden Words, Remarkable, Grand Design, Expert Sabotage, Vicious Bite, Holy Conquest, Flexible, blah 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 blah. There's a whole lot. Rattling Bellow and others. Added several new curse and aura-centric notables. This is cool. I'm glad that they are keeping Cluster Jewels in the game, and presumably they will continue to expand on Cluster Jewel functionality as time goes on. At least I really hope so. Alright, so they're nerfing a bunch of two-handed weapon damages. Calm's Primacy is nerfed, Dancing Dervish is nerfed, Ngamahu's Flame is nerfed, Marohi Urki is nerfed, Kitaba's Feast is nerfed, Kingmaker is nerfed, Void Forge is nerfed, Doomsower is nerfed, Kondo's Pride is nerfed, Terminus Est is nerfed, Sinvicta's Metal is nerfed, Disfavor is nerfed, but not a lot. Disintegrator is nerfed, Hegemonies is nerfed, and reduced crit. I think that's stupid. I know that they want to promote people crafting, but the way to promote people crafting is not to nerf the unique weapons. The unique weapons should have stayed the same, and it would have promoted crafting. The reason there being, you only ever want to craft if it is actually worthwhile to do so. And frankly, the reality now is no one's going to use two-handers. So no one's gonna craft them. People, like, if Hegemonies doesn't get nerfed, people will want to use Hegemonies. And then after they use Hegemonies for long enough, they'll say, man, I could craft something that's 10% better than this. And they do it. I don't think these changes are good. I don't think the two-hander changes are enough. I don't think anyone is really going to be using two-handed weapons. I don't think people are going to be saying two-handed weapons feel so much better to play now. I think the changes are interesting, but it is not enough. It is not nearly enough, and nerfing the uniques is not the way to do it. Even though most of these changes will presumably result in the weapons doing very similar damage, I don't think that's the way to do it. Absolutely not. Okay, Envy, granted by United and Dream, All's Uprising, and the Elder mod, now grants 75% more added chaos damage to attacks and spells. I wonder if this is in addition to the fact that it also grants flat chaos. If it only does this, I think that is probably good enough for the people that want to use the new skills, but I agree that it's a pretty weird choice and a mistake overall. Yeah, like, the people that are just absolutely going to use two-handers, this doesn't change anything for them, but I just don't think, like, if they're trying to bring two-handers up into the meta, the way to do that is not to buff the base type and then nerf the unique. The way to do that is just straight up buff the base type and leave the uniques. Like, the uniques are not going to be overpowered, because the mechanics of two-handers will never make them overpowered. Like, things are overpowered when you can go really, really, really fast. Like, speed is what's overpowered. Slow two-handers are not going to be overpowered. Like, that's what bothers me about it. So Envy got buffed. I'm actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think that it just means that the flat damage that it gives is 75% higher. Radius increased by 14 units. So it's buffed. I mean, that's cool. Timeless Jewels. New keystones have been added to replace the 5 that are now available on the passive skill tree. The new ones are the Traitor, Supreme Ostentation, Chainbreaker, Transcendent, Immortal Ambition. Existing Timeless Jewel keystones will retain the old keystones, but if you re-roll them with a Divine Orb, they will be able to reveal these new keystones. Aldi. No longer triggers Abyssal Cry on hit, now causes enemies taunted by your war cries to explode on death, dealing 8% of their maximum life as chaos damage. Now grants 25% increased Warcry buff effect, down from 50%. Now causes Warcry skills to have a cooldown of 4 seconds from 2. These changes affect all versions of the items except for the Warcry buff effect, which can be updated to new values with a Divine Orb. Arborix no longer causes you to gain iron reflexes every 8 seconds for 16 seconds. Now causes you to deal 30% more damage with arrow hits at close range while you have iron reflexes. Or grants 30% increased attack, cast, and movement speed, or far shot while you don't. No longer grants increased evasion rating or causes bow attacks to fire 2 additional arrows. Instead, it now grants iron reflexes constantly, as well as level 30 dash. If you have cast dash recently, it grants 100 to 160% increased evasion rating and 20 to 30% increased movement speed. If you haven't cast dash recently, it instead grants 20 to 30% increased attack speed and causes bow attacks to fire 2 additional arrows. Travel skills other than dash are disabled while this is equipped. Existing versions are unaffected by these changes. That is a really cool change to Arborix. I actually think I like that. I like that it is now a bow that's all about mobility as opposed to this bow that's like this weird hybrid of you want to have iron reflexes and not. The way to buff two-handers is to make them better with Cyclone. The way to buff two-handers is actually make two-handed skills that feel good. Apex Rage no longer increases mana cost by 40%, and now grants plus 40% to the mana cost of skills. Existing items are unaffected. Barracks Respite, the radius at which you can spread ailments is now 25 units from 12. This affects existing versions of the item. This is huge. Bitter Dream no longer supports socketed skills with level 1 Mana Leech, now supports socketed gems with level 1 Bone Chill. This does not... Actually, this is a big deal. This might make Bitter Dream usable for cold spells, right? Because the Mana Leech was always useless. That's close. Like, level 1 is never really relevant, but you can use Bitter Dream at, like, level 30. I actually really like this change. The Black Cane. Phantasmal Might granted by Summon Phantasms now provides 50% more added physical damage to spells at all levels of the respective Phantasm source. This affects existing versions. Blood Dance. We've seen this change. Reduces attack and cast speed by 4% from 3. Increases damage by a very significant margin against enemies on low life from 6% up to 20 to 30%. Now causes you to regenerate 0.8% life per frenzy charge from 5%. Existing items can be updated if you use a Divine Orb. Brain Rattler, more chance to shock. Shocks enemies as though dealing 300% more damage. No longer has chance to cause enemies to flee. Now has a little bit lower added fizz range. Existing items will be updated to the new values if you use a Divine Orb. Brinerot Flag no longer grants 2 power charges when you Warcry. Now grants Arcane Surge to you and allies when you use a Warcry. The Arcane Surge's effect is increased based on the Warcry's power up to 50%. Existing versions of this item are unaffected. I like that change. That is one good change. Giving you Arcane Surge, and it's you and allies. So allies, minions count as allies. So being able to give Spectres Arcane Surge is pretty good. Giving Golems Arcane Surge might be pretty good. Broken Faith, we've seen this change as well. No longer grants 5 to 10% of Fizz as extra chaos. Now causes you to create Profane Ground instead of Consecrated Ground. Got the minus 10% chance to block back. Grants Unholy Might while you have no energy shield, rather than for 10 seconds on block. All of the Synthesis Rings got their reduced reservation cost halved, and their buff effect almost halved. I wonder what would happen if you used a Divine Orb on these. Try it and let us know. Oh, boy. Crown of the Tyrant. Now, it gives you more max life. And that's it. Okay. Darkness Enthroned now increases the effect of socketed jewels by 75%. Wow. That's a big deal. I did not see that coming at all. So Darkness Enthroned, I've always really liked as a low-level jewel belt. It, of course, is utterly useless by late game, but because it has no level requirement, you know, having a 30 life jewel in there at level 1 getting buffed from 30 to 45 was big, but now your 30 life jewel gets buffed to like 50, 53 life or something like that, 52 life. And that is, oof, that is really significant. Dark Seer now causes blind to not affect your chance to hit rather than preventing blind. Grants 40 to 60% increased global damage, 10% global chance to blind. While you are blinded, enemies blinded by you have malediction. Existing versions will have values updated but will not gain malediction. Yeah. Dodra's Malevolence no longer grants plus 50 to mana cost of skills. Instead, they will grant 30 to 50% increased seal gain frequency. Wow. This is actually super cool. So now it doesn't have the mana cost penalty, and it makes unleash seals. It makes you gain unleash seals more. So, I mean, this was relegated to only like people that wanted to pump up the mana cost on their brands. Basically, it was this or Voidbringer. But now they've got rid of that, you know, downside for every build but one, and gave it increased seal frequency. That's super cool. That means that, like, just having another reason to use Unleash, right? It's another buff to self-cast. Doriani's Invitation grants triple the leech and grants up to triple the status effect. Existing copies can be updated using a Divine Orb. Duskblight no longer supports socketed gems with level 15 added chaos damage. It now triggers level 15 Stalking Pustule on kill and adds 30 to 40 to 50 to 60 chaos damage to spells and attacks during any flask effect. Duskblade is like the upgraded Dusk Toe or whatever, right? I would be very interested to see what Stalking Pustule is. Existing versions are not affected by these changes. The Enmity Divine no longer supports socketed skills with level 10 Life Leech. Now supports socketed skills with level 1 Chance to Bleed. Now has 30 to 40 dot multi for bleeding from crits. These changes do not affect existing versions. The Harbinger of Brutality buff now grants 50% reduced damage taken from 40 and has a 20-second cooldown from 40. Wow, that's a big nerf to that damage reduction, though. Affects all versions of the item. Essentia Sanguis, we saw this, no longer causes you to leech energy shield instead of life. Instead, it grants Ghost Reaver. Causes energy shield leech effects from attacks to not be removed at full energy shield. Grants 50% reduced maximum recovery per energy shield leech. Changes do not affect existing versions of the item. Fevered Mind no longer increases mana cost of skills by 50%. No longer grants 30 to 40% increased spell damage. Now causes notable passive skills and radius to be transformed to instead grant 10% increased mana cost of skills and 20% increased spell damage. Now has a small radius. Existing versions of this item are not affected by these changes. It is now also limited to one, which does affect existing versions of this item. So this is actually really cool. It's obviously not as good for the build that was using it, but this makes it a little bit more lucrative to players that really just want to be getting a bunch of spell damage. Right? It changes all notables in the radius to 20% increased spell damage. Maybe that's not enough. In fact, it probably isn't enough, right? Because that means it's just costing more points. So now that I think about it, this is essentially worthless. Unless you're using it for the increased mana cost of skills, it's worthless. Fragile Bloom no longer increases damage taken by 10% or causes you to regenerate 2% of life per second. Now grants 1 fragile regrowth each second up to 10. Causes 0.7% of life to regenerate per second per fragile regrowth. All fragile regrowths are lost when hit. Existing versions of this item are not affected by these changes. Now also limited to 1, which does affect existing versions of the item. Joffrey's Devotion. The elemental warding skill now has a cooldown of 1 second from 10. Wow. Only triggers on melee hit rather than any. Okay, that makes sense. And makes you unaffected by curses rather than immune to curses for its duration. That is cool. This affects all existing versions of the item due to base type changes. It has, what, a little bit less added flat fizz. Can be updated to values with the Divine Orb. Gloomfang. No longer causes projectiles to gain 15 to 20% of non-chaos damage as extra chaos damage per chain. Now causes projectiles that have chained to gain 20 to 35% of non-chaos damage as extra chaos damage. And grants increased proj speed. Existing versions of the item are unaffected. Wow. So, we now have Legacy Gloomfang. Cool, man. Hasmana's Bloodlust. New versions of this item will now also have 40% increased attack speed if you've taken a savage hit recently. Due to base type changes, they reduced its fizz. Hot-footed, renamed Hot-headed because it ain't just your feet that are quick now. Now grants 10 to 20% increased movement speed while ignited. On new versions, it also grants 10 to 20% increased attack speed and 10 to 20% increased cast speed. Hyoun's Fury. Now grants 15 to 20% increased lightning damage for Frenzy Charge. Existing item can be updated to these new values with the Divine Orb. Oh, okay, so that got buffed. Hyperboreus now causes focus to have 30 to 50% increased cooldown recovery speed. Wow, that's a big buff to Hyperboreus. No one was using it, but that's a big buff to it. Inevitability no longer causes Magma Orb to fiber an additional proj. Instead, it causes Magma Orb to deal 50% less damage and 40% more damage per chain. Existing versions of this items are not affected. It is now also limited to 1, which does affect existing versions. Kitava's Thirst now has a 50% chance to trigger socketed spells when you spend at least 100 mana, up from 30. I know a guy who has always wanted to do a Kitava's Thirst build. Kongming's Stratagem now grants 30 to 50% increased fire damage with hits and ailments against blighted enemies, up from 30%, and has a huge increased energy shield. Existing items can be updated to the news values with a Divine Orb. The Fog of War skill that is triggered when a trap is triggered has also been improved, with a larger radius and a cooldown of 1 second from 3. Wow. What an odd buff to a totally obscure shield. Limb Split and the Cauterizer. New versions of the item also triggered Gore's Shockwave on hit if you have at least 150 strength. Limb Split triggers a level 1 version. The Cauterizer triggers a level 5 version. This is super cool. I really like weapons that trigger. Ugh. I'm sitting on a blanket and it's starting to bother me. Malakai's Loop now grants 12 to 16% increased spell damage per power charge, up from 6%. Existing versions can be updated to the new values with the Divine Orb. That's a big buff. That almost tripled at the top end. Malakai's Vision regenerates 200% energy shield per second if all equipped items are corrupted. That is a big buff there. If you find a way to reroll existing versions of the item, then something has gone terribly, terribly wrong. Malagaro's Lens. The radius at which nearby enemies are healed when you have died has been increased to 35 units from 20. Finally! The amount of which allies are healed is now 1% of your maximum life from 2. No! Which existing versions can be updated with the use of a Divine Orb and a temporary loss of your mental faculties. Mark of the Red Covenant. Minions now have 20 to 45% increased movement speed, up from 10 to 15. Summon Raging Spirits no longer refresh the duration when they kill and ignite an enemy, and instead deal fire-only splash damage to surrounding targets. Existing items are unaffected. I think this change is pretty bad. Mark of the Red Covenant was already really bad, but now not having the spirits refresh the duration. Well, I guess it's not a huge deal, right? You just have to recast them over and over. I still think it's bad. Martial Artistry no longer grants increased area of effect while unarmed, instead grants 3 to 4 melee strike range while unarmed, also causes passive skills and radius to grant 1% increased attack speed with unarmed attacks. Now it's a small radius. This is really cool. I really like it when they do things like this. Like it grants all the passives in its radius. I'm assuming, right? Every single node that you allocate in its radius will also give you 1% increased attack speed with unarmed. Might and Influence, totally redesigned. It now grants 10 to 50% increased attack damage rather than global fizz, and 2 randomly selected weapon-specific benefits from a small pool. It still requires that you have at least 40 dex in radius for those mods to activate. Existing items are unaffected. Yeah, I had seen this earlier today on Reddit, that they posted one, and it was like a mace and a dagger, and people were like, what the hell? This is super weird. And Bex said, well, it pulls from a pool of all weapon types. So this is going to be really interesting, because you'll be able to get them for every single melee weapon type. And so some will be very good and some will be just garbage, but it'll be really cool to be able to sort of tailor your dual wield experience. Moonbender's Wing, we saw the change here. Triggers level 10 Lightning Warp on hit. No longer converts 25% fizz to cold and 25% fizz to lightning. Instead, hits with your weapon now gain 75 to 100% of fizz as extra cold or lightning. No longer has any added fizz and now has 30 to 50% increased fizz from 70 to 90. And existing versions are unaffected. Kind of want to use this with Blade Vortex. Triggers level 10 Lightning Warp on hit and gives you a huge amount of fizz as extra. It'd be funny, at least. Mute Wind Pennant now grants Call to Arms, one of the new keystones. Ngamahu's Flame now converts 60% of fizz to fire from 50. That's the only change. Knight's Hold now requires level 12. This is a cool change. Knight's Hold was previously very, very good because I believe it had no level requirement, or its level requirement was like very, very low. So people just threw Flame Totem in there, because it had like added chaos, right? Like level 10 added chaos or something. So yeah, that's a really good change, and I think that will make people want to level with it more. Perseverance now grants 1% increased attack damage per 200 of the lowest of armor and evasion. Previously was 300. Okay, so that's a buff to Perseverance. Poet's Pen, improved behavior around animation canceling. Works similar to Spell Slinger. Razor of the Seventh Sun converts 30% of fizz to fire from 25. Okay. Reach, we've seen the weirdness here. Each of the different firing points do something different. First one pierces, second forks, third returns, and fourth chains 2 times. Red Blade Banner no longer grants 2% of attack damage leads his life against taunted enemies, now causes Warcry to have infinite power. Existing versions of this items are unaffected. So Red Blade Banner makes it where your Warcries always give you their maximum benefit. It's kind of cool. Reverberation Rod and Amplification Rod now grants +2 levels to socketed gems. Holy shit. Now supports socketed spells with level 10 Spell Echo. Amplification Rod now supports socketed spells with level 10 Controlled Destruction and level 10 Intensify. Wow. That is a really unexpected and big change. Holy crap. So you get level 10 Spell Echo, level 10 Control Destruction, and level 10 Intensify on a +2 wand. Man. I like that a lot. I like that a lot. I've always had a soft spot for Reverberation Rod and Amplification Rod, but it was just never really worth using. But man, this makes it close. I know that it's +2 only to socketed, right? That's the big complaint people have. Like, that's why people say like Life Sprig is totally useless now. Still, you've got a 6-link Amplification Rod that gives +2 to your socketed spell. Man, I like that a lot. I like that change a lot. Rigwald's command, we've seen this change. 1% bleed dot multi per rage while wielding an axe. No longer has 80% increased fizz with axes or 15% chance to gain a frenzy charge. Savagery no longer grants 35% increased attack speed with swords or 25% chance to bleed, but it gives you 25 maximum rage when wielding a sword. Okay, Rolling Flames no longer gives you additional radius on distance traveled because Fireball now grants that inherently. Instead, it grants 30 to 50% chance to Scorch, but prevents Fireball from igniting. This doesn't affect existing versions of the Jewel, however, it's now limited to one, which does affect existing versions. So, this seems useless. I don't think you... Fireball is a build that wants to ignite, right? Like, the Fireball build was always Ignite Prolith. I don't see a Fireball build wanting to go Scorch. I mean, maybe you do it, because Scorch is reduced resists, right? Yeah, I don't think that this matters, but whatever, it's interesting. Sakawal's Flock now has a 100% chance to trigger level 20 Tornado when you gain Avian's Might or Avian's Flight from 25%. Wow, so this might almost be build-aroundable now. You can trigger Tornado absolutely reliably. The Savior, Mirage Warriors have been renamed to Mirage Saviors to differentiate them from those created by General's Cry. Okay. Strike skills used by Mirage Saviors cannot hit additional targets. This affects all existing versions of the item. This change is required to maintain server performance, as builds using the Savior with certain strike skills were causing enough calculations to put noticeable strain on the servers. It was accidentally missed in the development manifesto. Strike skills used by Mirage Saviors cannot hit additional targets. Okay, so it's basically saying you can't have Tribal Fury or Ancestral Call affect your Mirage Saviors. I don't think that's unreasonable. The Scourge. New copies of this item no longer have a chance to trigger Summon Spectral Wolf. Now causes increases and reductions to minion damage to also affect you at 150% of their value, which affects all versions of the item. Wow. Shattered Chains can no longer drop Rot in Standard. Don't think anyone was using Shattered Chains, but okay. Spirited Response, now limited to 1, now causes you to gain 10% of damage taken as mana over 4 seconds when hit if you've Warcried recently. This affects all existing versions of the item. Split Personality, now limited to 2. Starforge, wow. 2 to 300% fizz from 400 to 500. Oof. Now gains a 30% increased global fizz damage implicit by default, overriding the base type. Existing items can be ruthlessly brought back into a reasonable balanced state with the Divine Orb. I think this is a terrible change. No one... This was like... Starforge and Dying Sun were the only reason to run Shaper. Like, do people even want Starforge now? Troll Timber Spire now causes both you and your totems, rather than just you, to regenerate 0.5% of life per second for each summoned totem from just 0.5. Affects all versions of the item. Okay, that's a cool change. You and your totems will regen per each totem you have. Isn't that just like the Hierophant node? Ungol's Harmony, we've seen this change. Gives huge global crit, but causes your crits to deal no extra damage. Existing items can be updated to the new values with the Divine Orb. Ulnital's Embrace triggers level 20 Bone Nova when you hit a bleeding enemy rather than when you kill a bleeding enemy. When it triggers, the bones are fired from the enemy's location rather than yours. Affects all versions of the item. Balako's Sign now grants 1% of damage leached as life against shocked enemies from 0.2 and 25% chance to shock up from 10. That's a big buff. Valerium now grants a little bit more energy shield and a little bit more fire resist. Okay. Voice of the Choir and Voice of the Storm triggered lightning bolts now with a base crit of 7.5 up from 6. Added damage effectiveness of 200% up from 150%. Cooldown of 0.2 seconds from 0.5. Wow, this is a huge buff to Choir of the Storm. 1.5% base crit, 50% damage effectiveness, and over halved the cooldown. Voidbringer no longer increases the mana cost of skills by 40 to 80%, now grants 40 to 80 to the mana cost of skills instead. Wake of Destruction. New versions no longer cause enemies to flee, instead leave shock ground in its wake. Last 2 seconds. Warp Timepiece grants a little bit more attack speed, a little bit more cast speed, a little bit more movement speed, a little bit more reduced skill effect duration, and increased total recovery per second from Leech, rather than Life Leech and Mana Leech specifically. Okay, so this is just because of the new Essentia Sanguis, presumably. So Warped Timepiece can increase your Energy Leech. I suppose it can also increase Energy Leech from, like, you know, the skill, the support gem and stuff. Whispering Ice. Wow, so Whispering Ice got buffed. Increased damage effectiveness. White Wind now grants way more evasion. Grants a variable chance to dodge. And grants a whole pile more cold damage. Wow! That is a really big buff to White Wind. So, it used to be that you were losing out on a lot by using White Wind. You were losing out on all the power of a shield. But getting 1500 evasion rating is like as much as a pretty good shield. And you're also getting 200% cold damage and 25% chance to 25% attack dodge. I mean, that White Wind is essentially a good cold weapon and a reasonable evasion shield. I really like that change. I really like that change. Wildfire has been mostly redesigned. We know about the change here already, but it grants 10 to 50% increased fire damage, no longer grants additional proj or increased AoE, now causes Molten Strike projectiles to chain once, and causes Molten Strike to fire 50% fewer projectiles. Wings of Entropy, it changed its base type, now on an Ezomite axe, grants 7 to 10% spell block, 8 to 10 attack block, a little bit more fire and chaos flat, and reduced local fizz due to the change in base type. Yeah, I don't even think that this is a buff. So they said they were reworking 50 unique items, and this does not feel like sufficient reworks. So that really feels disingenuous. There's about 15 uniques that feel reasonably reworked, maybe 20, and a lot of them were just like, this is buffed, this is nerfed. Okay. Monster changes. Due to a number of changes making it much easier to reliably stun tough enemies, many bosses are now immune to stun while stunned, and for a short time after the stun ends. Oh, so you can't chain stun. The base distance an enemy is knocked back by knockback effect is now based on the enemy's size. Smaller enemies are knocked back farther than large enemies. The Man Tracker monster in Hunter Influence maps now spread their spit attacks out rather than all spitting at once. It is now correctly categorized as an attack and will be mitigated as such. Monsters that deal extra chaos damage, many of whom are encountered in a breach, now say so beneath their nameplate. Note that this does not change the balance of these monsters. Abyss changes. The area transition to an Abyssal Depths area now becomes interactable more quickly after appearing. That's nice. Monsters, crystals, and other boss encounter elements are now destroyed when Amanamu is defeated. Betrayal changes. Elrion's Unholy Relics and Sentinel minions now die when Elrion is defeated. Thank God. I lost a hardcore character to this, and I have had softcore characters die a number of times to just sitting there, and then like 15 seconds later, those unholy relics explode, and you die. Unholy relics summoned by immortal syndicate members who possess Boo's bottle now disappear when that member is defeated. Good, good, good. Ground effects created by immortal syndicate members will likewise disappear when the associated member is defeated. You can now quick move items between your inventory and the various betrayal safe house benches. Okay, so you can control click. Map tiers and locations have been shuffled, though the pin locations for maps have not changed. Most maps are now initially found at a different tier. Unique maps have not moved or changed tiers. Improve the responsiveness of Cirrus storms to phase transitions. Improve the layout of the spider layer map to minimize backtracking. Zana can now send you on a mission to find and activate a Legion monolith. Oh, that's nice. So now you'll have Zana missions that are like activate the monolith. That's cool. I like when Zana missions interact with League content that way. We've seen the Zana mods. So Fortune favors the brave, which we've always had. Anarchy, Breach. Breach at 2, it's sad. We used to be really excited about getting Breach, and now like Breach at 2, I don't think anyone even cares. Ambush at 3, Nemesis at 4. This is kind of a big deal, getting Nemesis at 4. Harbinger at 4 is kind of nice. Metamorph at 5, and Legion at 6. So, yeah, I actually really like these. I really don't care about Anarchy, Breach, Ambush, but I don't even really care about Nemesis. But yeah, Harbinger, Metamorph, Legion, those are gonna feel pretty good. Oil costs for notable passive skills can be revealed while holding Alt while hovering over the passive. Map icons in the Map Stash tab will now display with which Atlas region they are in when hovered over. The Stash tab list no longer closes after you select a tab. Added the ability to hide, remove only stash tabs. A bunch of quest reward changes. So these are just going to be, I guess I'll read them. Gosh, this has been an hour and 20 minutes already. Enduring Cry and Intimidating Cry are now offered to the Marauder and Duelist. For completing Cage Brute can be purchased from Nessa by the Templar and Scion. Earth Shatter is offered to the Marauder and Duelist for completing the Siren's Cadence and can be purchased from Nessa by the Templar and Scion. Wintertide Brand is now offered to the Witch and Templar for completing the Siren's Cadence and can be purchased from Nessa by the Shadow and Scion. Storm Brand is now offered to the Witch for completing the Siren's Cadence. Previously, this was only available for the vendor. For the Witch, Brand Recall is now offered to the Witch for completing Intruders in Black. Previously, this was only available from the vendor for the Witch. Ancestral Cry and Seismic Cry are now offered to the Marauder and the Duelist for completing Intruders in Black and can be purchased from Yena by the Templar and Scion. Infernal Cry and General's Cry are now offered to the Modder for completing Lost in Love and can be purchased from Clarissa by the Templar, Duelist, and Scion. Rallying Cry is now offered to the Duelist for completing Lost in Love and can be purchased from Clarissa by the Marauder, the Templar, and the Scion. Penance Brand is now offered to the Witch and Templar for completing Sever the Right Hand and can be purchased from Clarissa by the Scion. Armageddon Brand is now offered to the Witch for completing Sever the Right Hand. Previously, this was available only from the vendor for the Witch. Swift Brand support is now offered to the Witch and Templar for completing a Fixture of Fate and can be purchased from Siosa by the Shadow and Scion. Arcanist Brand is now offered to the Witch and Templar for completing the Eternal Nightmare and can be purchased from Pitaris and Vanja by the Shadow and Scion. Fist of War support is now offered to the Marauder, Duelist, and Templar for completing the Eternal Nightmare and can be purchased from Pitaris and Vanja by the Scion. PvP changes. I am not even going to bother reading those. Bug fixes. Fixed a bug where Thunderstruck caused all hits against shock enemies to knock those enemies back rather than just critical hits. That is an interesting bug. Fixed a bug where items with a fixed number of sockets, such as Lore Weaver Onigoroshi, could have the number of sockets reduced through the hideout crafting bench, but not increased. Now the number, or if the item specifies color of sockets, can no longer be affected by the crafting bench. Fixed a bug where Orb of Storm's hit frequency benefited doubly from increases to cast speed. Fix a bug where betrayal members on a transportation job are teleporting too frequently. Fixed a bug where brands hovered above Kitava's head and typically off-screen. Fixed a bug which caused the Arcane Capacitor Notable to not correctly update the effects of Arcane Surge as mana was spent. Fixed a bug which prevented mana reserved by mines to not correctly update with the increases and reductions to mana reservation. Fixed a bug which caused Elemental Hit to not increase its area of effect when hitting enemies affected by Scorch, Bird, or Sapped. Fixed a bug where the Heraldry Notable would continue to affect Heralds even after the Cluster Jewel was removed. Fixed a bug where, due to how some changes in terrain is generated. A number of hideout templates became invalidated. Fixed a bug where the withering step effect lost an eye. It had no effect on accuracy as far as we know. Fixed a bug which caused the many-faced totem in the field's map boss room to become a transparent if slain while under the effects of delirium. That's a weird bug. Fixed several modifiers that didn't have names. Typo in Stormbind's description. Fixed a bug which caused the AoE of Lightning Whip used by several monsters to get way too big. I wonder if this meant barrage totems were inexplicably powerful, if they were effectively firing 2 barrages at once. Yeah, a lot of these look like these really narrow situations. Yeah, like, so bizarre. Fixed a bug which caused auto-spectate in PvP to stop working. Like, this is stuff that's probably existed for a long time, but they're so esoteric. Alright, so, that's the patch notes. Ugh, big yawn. An hour and a half of reading and giving some thoughts. Well, so let's talk about a couple of things. Big winners. Big winners are actually spells. Right? Purifying Flame. Wave of Conviction. I would argue that Magma Orb got a big buff. I know the Gloomfang interaction is nerfed, but this is big. Lightning Trap, Ice Trap, Frostbolt, Freezing Pulse, Firestorm. Right, like spells. Spells are big winners. So I think a lot of those spells. Very obvious builds are going to be using those spells with Arcanist Brand. Those are going to be good builds. Like Fireball Arcanist Brand is going to be fine. Freezing Pulse Arcanist Brand is going to be fine. Because they just got numerical buffs. So some of those spells just got big numerical buffs, big winners. What else is a big winner? War Cries. I would say War Cries are big winners, and I know they wanted War Cries to be big winners, but I really like that War Cries are now going to be a lot more flexible, and I think there are going to be a lot more builds that try to fit in a War Cry. Another big winner, minion builds. The General's Cry is probably not really minion-centric, but the reworked Rallying Cry, right, that grants your minions added damage based off the damage of your weapon, that is going to be a big deal, and that's going to make it where you might want, like, a Tier 1 added elemental on your weapon so that you can transfer a bunch of that to your minions. Right, that might be a really big deal. Or even just using, like, what is it? Is it, no, it's not Metodals. It's, whatever. I don't remember. One of the incursion weapons where it's like tier 1% fizz and then 5% of fizz as chaos. Like 5% of fizz added as chaos. Even just like having that as one of your prefixes on a caster weapon is going to give your minions a bunch of damage. So I think minion builds really, they were already very, very good, and They got a little bit of additional functionality in the war cries, and I could, I could see minion builds doing a couple of different things, right? I could see minion builds using Infernal Cry to cover enemies in Ash, and I could also see them using the one that makes your minions do a bunch more damage. It's not even here. It must have been one of the reworked ones. Rallying Cry, yeah. So those are some big winners, right? I think a lot of the things that were powerful will continue to be powerful. Big losers, I'm going to say two-handers. I am really disappointed with what they're doing for two-handed weaponization. All they have done is added some new skills, balanced some skills, and increased base damage while nerfing all the uniques. So I don't think that's enough. I don't think it's enough. I don't think it really changes the playstyle of two-handed weapons. Yeah, maybe people will use Earthquake because Earthquake has always done a huge pile of damage. But it's a really awkward playstyle where you smack the ground and you blow up the screen, and you literally have to do that with every single pack of monsters. But we'll see. Maybe I'll be proven wrong. Other big losers. What were some of the other nerfs? I mean, Stormbrand, of course. Stormbrand, not necessarily gutted. I think it actually increased its crit, but it got its activation frequency nerfed. It got its unattached frequency nerfed, and I think Stormbrand, more than some of the other brands, really benefited from that kind of chaininess of it falling wherever the monster it was on died. Now it will be moving back to where it was originally summoned, and I think that is, especially for Stormbrand, a much bigger nerf. Some of the other, because Stormbrand chains, right? Because Stormbrand chains and it can hit enemies that are further away, I think that makes that a bigger nerf compared to some of the other skills. What else? I don't want to say Ball Lightning is one of the big losers, but I think all of the things that wanted slower proj, pour one out for those guys. I'm actually really surprised, though. I don't even think there are any super significant nerfs. I think Headhunter got nerfed finally, but it has been needing to get nerfed for an incredibly long time because screw Headhunter. And Herald builds got nerfed. I am going to be really interested in seeing exactly how the Cluster Jewel notables got changed. If they pretty much got nerfed across the board, I think that's going to be really, really unfortunate because the Cluster Jewels need to be competitive to warrant A, finding them and rolling them to get what you want, and B, putting the points into them. I mean, a full suite of Cluster Jewels was like 20 points, and that is a lot of skill points. If those skill points aren't really good, especially because five of those skill points were just the Cluster Jewels themselves, right? Your large, 2 mediums, and 2 smalls. So, I don't know. Cluster Jewels could be a big loser. There's definitely that possibility, but they didn't go over all of the Cluster Jewel rebalance here. They just went over where is it? Is it going to be passive tree? No. Yeah, here. So all they did is they said that many balance changes have been made. So these could be big losers, but frankly, some of them might have gotten buffed, right? Because some of them were really, really underused. So we'll see. This one I think is what's up in the air. Right? Cluster Jewels might be a winner. They might be a loser. But we will know in just a couple of days. So it's the 16th. Harvest drops in 3 days. The build that I was planning on using, which has not changed now, I will almost assuredly be going Occultist using Wintertide Brand and Vortex. Unfortunately, Vortex did not see a buff, but whatever. Vortex is still really strong. I think there will be a lot of people playing Essence Drain Contagion. I think there will be a lot of people playing Spellslinger. Ziz just did a very, very long video about leveling with Spellslinger. And so I have a feeling that there will be a lot of people wanting to do that on League Start. It is very, very strong for League Start. Requires very little gear. I'm even thinking of maybe using Spellslinger until I can really start getting cold dots going. So like basically leveling as Arc and then building into Spellslinger. And then maybe like Act 7 transitioning over to Wintertide Brand and Vortex. So that's kind of my plan right now. I'll be playing in a private league. I will be streaming that on Friday. Should be playing with a buddy. I am unsure if I will be streaming with my friend the entire time or if I will have to change characters and play solo. But ideally, I will be playing this Cold Dot character all day Friday, all day Saturday. But I might be playing something else if I need to be playing solo. So really looking forward to Harvest. Hope to see you all on Friday. Take it easy.